Hello, welcome to 3rd grade. I am your teacher, Mr. Ritenour, and if you'd like to make this video bigger, click the YouTube button down below. Alright, so today is my birthday. I am officially 28 years old. Yes, I'm getting old, 28. The only good news is my birthday is now divisible by 7, which you know is my favorite number. Anyway, we are going to do some things that I like since it's my birthday. So let's start off with one thing that I loved, and that was a video sent to me by our very own Wiley Shep featuring his brother JR, who had me in class when I was only 23. I know, crazy, 23. Hard to believe that was 4 or 5 years ago. All right, let's see what they've got for us. Oh, so close. Try again. JR is attempting what we call a scissor kick, which is like a backflip soccer kick, while Wiley tosses in the ball. Nice throw, Wiley. Boom! Awesome job. It's a goal! That was fantastic, guys. Way to go. I'm glad that you're teaming it up. If that were me and my brother, we would be fighting. So that's really cool to see you guys getting along and playing. Alright, so let's start with some common sense today. Today's common sense lesson, some words of wisdom here. Listen to all genres of music. Now, I don't mean that you have to listen to all genres of music every day. And I don't mean that you have to like all genres of music. But what I do think is wise is for you not to limit yourself and be like, I only like country music, or I love rock and roll, yeah. So what I want you to do is I want you to keep an open mind when you're listening to music that might not be the kind that you're used to listening. So let's watch a quick video of these two guys that try to play 26 different genres of music in correspondence to the 26 letters of the alphabet. You can see the names in the bottom right corner. That's Baroque.
Oh my God! My bleeding heart bleeds blood for you. Whoa, 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 whoa. Driving down this lonely road. Whoa. Facing my hurt in my face. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I chainsaw your face off. Watch your brains rotting, kid. Drain your veins rot, straining your esophagus. Original. Wie higher, total original. Il mio amore corrisposto. We all dance to the polka, for it is so fun. Still dancing to the polka with my accordion. Love is everywhere. Smoke is in the air. Pick it up, oi, 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 oi. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, oi, 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 oi. A to Z, C, C, A to Z, C, C, A to Z. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And our love will never end.
Hey, I'm Andrew Wong.
Hi, I'm Dave from Boy in the Band.
I am a Viking.
Okay, so hopefully you learned a couple different genres of music that you didn't already know. I think my favorite was probably the chip tune one, which was right off the bat. It was like that video game one. Um, I'm going to show you one other video that ties in with today's common sense, and this is called not the revolution, the evolution of music, and it's by one of my favorite Christmas music artists, Pentatonix. So if you remember, Pentatonix does everything a cappella, so no instruments, just voices. And pay attention because they'll have the years of the decades of the music that they're singing, and it gets newer and newer and newer. It's pretty neat. I think you'll like it.
Salve Regina. Bum, 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 bum.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are
River and Woodland River. Addy, 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 addy. Odi, 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 odi. Skilla di da di da do.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He's in the army now, I'm blowing reveille. He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Because you're mine, I walk the line. La boca de gracia. When the light was gold and the lamp was dark, I oh stand, oh stand. Ba 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 ba.
I wanna hold your hands. I wanna hold your R-E-S-P-C-T. I wanna meet me. R-E-S-P-C-T. Take it, ABC. That's easy as 1, 2, 3. As simple as do, re, mi. ABC. 1, 2, 3. Baby, you and me.
No, 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 no.
Mamma mia, mamma mia,
Mamma mia, let me go. Beelzebub has the devil put aside for me, for me, for me.
Celebrate good times, come on.
Celebration, celebration.
Oh,
Don't stop, believe it, 'cause this is Thriller. Hey, a Thriller night. Can't touch this.
kiss me, baby, one more time. Say my name, when no one is around you. Say, baby, I love you. You ain't running game. I want it that way.
Hey, I don't want to meet your daddy.
Oh, hey,
I remember when I lost my mind. Whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh, 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 oh.
I kissed a girl and I liked it. Taste of her cherry chapstick.
Roma, gaga, ooh la la.
I got a feeling, ooh, that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good
Baby, 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 oh,
Some nights I stay up, catching in my bed.
you're just somebody that call me maybe. Hey! Hey guys, thanks so much for watching our medley of some of our favorite songs throughout history. Sorry if we...
All right, folks. So, back to the lesson. It's cool to listen to all kinds of music. Even if you like one more than the other, it's always good to appreciate other genres of music as well. Okay, let's move on to some math. So we are at the point now in chapter 12 that we are done with all the new material, and now it's time to review. And since we're not together, I don't think it's fair to give you any tests. That would be silly. So instead of doing the chapter 12 review / test, everyone just take your pencil and just cross off the test part. Chapter 12 review. So I guess I should have said, first of all, get your Go Math books out. We're on page 753. Pause it if you need to. All right, so question number 1, numero uno. Which words describe this shape? So let's look at this shape. All right, A, polygon. So let's see, Jasper, you're up. A polygon has to have two things. First, a polygon has to have what kind of sides? Curved or straight? Yeah, straight. And Jasper, are polygons open or closed? Good, they're closed. So is this shape straight lines and closed? Yeah, it absolutely does. So everyone go ahead and fill in letter A. It's definitely a polygon. All right, Evan, is this an open shape? Is there any spot that you can break into it? No, right? It's completely closed on all of its sides. So it's not an open shape. London, is it a pentagon? Well, think about it. A pentagon has to have how many sides? Good, London, 5. So let's count. Do we have 5 sides? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We do. So this is a pentagon. So go ahead and fill in letter C as well. All right, so if it's a pentagon, it has 5 sides. So letter D, Sophie, is it a quadrilateral? No, right? Because a quadrilateral has to have 4 sides, and we know this one has 5. All right, good teamwork, folks. Let's move on here. Number 2, Umberto drew one side of a quadrilateral with 4, I'm going to underline important information. Do the same thing at home in your book. 4 equal sides, no right angles. Draw the other 3 sides to complete the shape. So we need 3 more sides that are the exact same length. We can't have right angles. So let's see. This line is 1, 2, 3 spaces long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line down here. 1, 2, 3 spaces long. And I'm going to do the same thing up top. 1, 2, 3 spaces long. And then I'm going to connect these corners. So now I have a shape, and I can show that this shape has 4 equal sides by doing something really easy, right? I can put a line just like that in the middle of each of my 4 sides, and that says to the person that's looking at it that those sides are all equal. Do I have any perfect corners? No, I don't. I don't have any perfect corners, which means I don't have any right angles. So that is the shape that Umberto drew. Okay, Mikael, not you, Michael Canot. Mikael in the question. Saw a painting that included this shape. Interesting. For numbers 3A through 3D, select true or false. Well, let's do it. Bobby, letter A. The shape has no right angles, true or false? Yeah, that's a big definitely false because right here and right here, Bobby, those are both right angles. So this is definitely a false statement. Let's see, Lucas. The shape has two angles greater than a right angle. All right, Lucas. So we know that there are four angles on this shape. Two of them, I'm going to cross these off. We know these are 90 degrees, so they can't work. Let's look at the other two angles. So in green, I'm going to highlight this corner, this angle, and then in blue, I'm going to highlight this angle right here. So Lucas, the green angle, is it greater than a right angle? Yes, it is, right? So that one checks out. But what about the blue? Is the blue angle greater than a right angle? No, it's not. It's an acute angle. So if we look back at the question, it specifically says two angles greater than. So we know that that is false because there's just one. Good job, Lucas. Patina, the shape has two right angles. True or false? Well, you can see on your own, I'll erase mine, that it does have one, two right angles. So Patina is saying true. The shape has one angle greater than a right angle. Now, if you remember back when I was drawing this out with Lucas here, we've got one greater than a right angle. So the answer to that one would be what, Cody? Yes, it would be true. Very good, very good. All right, so that's the first page. Let's flip it. Question 4, it says Fran uses a Venn diagram. So a Venn diagram is that thing with the two big circles. In the middle is what they have in common. On the sides is what they have different. So draw another plane shape. So another plane shape means 2D, two-dimensional, that belongs inside the left circle, but not where they overlap. Okay, so let's look at our labels here. We've got polygons with right angles, and then we've got quadrilaterals. So quadrilaterals are a special type. They are four-sided. So I cannot draw any four-sided shapes for my answer, all right, because I can't have a quadrilateral. I need a polygon, though, that has right angles, that's not a four-sided shape. And it can't be either of these two that I'm drawing my arrows next to because they're already taken. So can you think of a way to draw a different polygon that has a right angle? This one's tricky, right? Well, let's take a look back at the last page. Look at number 1, the very first problem that we did. I think it was Jasper that told us that it is a polygon. And check it out. It has a right angle here. It has a right angle here. So let's go back to our box and let's draw that same exact polygon. And now we have an answer. We've got a right angle here. And yes, you can draw these little boxes so that it shows the reader or whoever's looking at it, those are right angles. And we have to just make sure it does not have four sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. So this is an example of a polygon that has right angles that is not a quadrilateral. So congratulations. Part B. How can you describe the shapes in the section where the circles overlap? So Peyton Fisher, how can you describe these two shapes right here? Just tell me what they are, actually. That would be the best description, I think. Yeah, you've got a square and a what fish? Good. And a rectangle. Good job, Peyton. All right, so Jacob Dubio. Match the object in the left column with its name in the right column. So that first one up here, where am I going with that? It's got arrows on both sides. It is a... Good, it's a line. Good job, dudes. All right, my next one, it's got points on both sides. What is that? Emily. Good, that's a segment or a line segment. Same thing. My next one, I've got a point on one side and an arrow on the other. Mr. Golden Sun, please shine down on me, right? Willow. Good, that's straight across, that's a ray. And last but not least, Michael. A dot in math is called? Good, what's the point, right? Get it? Ba-bum. Just kidding, that was lame. Describe the angles and sides of this triangle. Oh, I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. This was the lesson that we went off book. If you look closely at this triangle, look really close, right? To me, I'm pretty sure, and I can say with almost 100% certainty, all three of these angles, which I'm highlighting in red, all three are less than 90 degrees. So this is an, what angled less than 90 degrees? What do you think, Carson? Acute, good. Now let's look at the sides. All three of those sides look pretty much the same. So Wiley, what do we call that? Good, equilateral. So we've got an acute, equilateral, go ahead and write that, triangle. Well done, boys and girls. Last page we're going to do today. Which words describe this shape? Mark all that apply. So when you see that mark all, you know that there's probably more than one answer. All right, so if we're looking at our answers, we've got rectangle, rhombus, quadrilateral, and square. Let's just start with rectangle since it's letter A. The definition of a rectangle, it has to have 4 right angles, 2 parallel sides. 4 right angles, 2 parallel sides. Well, obviously it has 4 right angles. Does it have 2 parallel sides? Well, you tell me. Watch. I'm going to draw in purple. That side and this side are parallel. See how they'll never cross? Then in black, the left and the right side are parallel. They'll never cross each other. So yes, this fits the definition of a rectangle. Even though that's not the best answer, it is a rectangle, but that would not be the best answer. And you'll see later which one is the perfect answer. How about a rhombus? Well, by definition, a rhombus has 4 equal sides. All right, does this have 4 equal sides? Yeah, it does. Which makes it a rhombus. That was easy. You'll see though, there's a better answer. Rhombus is still not the best answer. How about a quadrilateral? Well, the definition of a quadrilateral is 4 straight closed sides. Is it a quadrilateral? Yes. This would be the most generic name of all for this shape, is a quadrilateral, right? Last but not least, and you'll see this next one is the absolute perfect answer. It's the most specific answer. Is this a square? Well, you've been learning about that since kindergarten, even before. Yes, it's a square because it has four right angles, it has four equal sides, so it is most specifically a square. So you could literally mark all four of those boxes and have all of them correct. All right, moving on. Divide each shape into the number of equal parts shown. So this is what we did yesterday. Write the fraction that describes each part. So can you break that square into three equal parts? Go ahead and do that on your own. Okay, so yours probably looks something like mine. Maybe you went up and down instead of side to side. But each one of those parts is equal to what fraction? Excellent, 1/3. And let me show you in green. I'll show you with the crayon. See how that each part is 1, that's the numerator, out of 3 total pieces. So 1/3. Okay, look at that hexagon here. We want to split that into 6 equal parts. See if you can do it on your own without me. This one's a little trickier. Think triangles. All right, I am trying this out. There we go. That's not too bad, right? That's not bad. Have mercy on me. It's my birthday. You've got one part, so 1 out of 6 total. So each part is 1/6. All right, last but not least, we've got our big rectangle. Split it into 8 equal parts. Go ahead. All right, that's what mine looks like. I'm sure yours probably looks similar, or maybe you did it a slightly different way. But if I were to shade in one part, what's that fraction? 1/8. Well done. All right, great work, boys and girls. We are cruising here. Last problem of the day. Han drew a triangle with one angle greater than a right angle. So I'm just gonna kind of cross this part out and write one obtuse angle, because that's what a greater than a right angle is. Let's use some fourth grade math words. Obtuse, fat. So yes or no, which triangle could he draw? Well, look at letter A. All right, let's just take your pencil and I want you just to trace each angle here. Are any of those obtuse? Yes or no? No, right? They're all acute. How about 9B? Let's trace our angles. This one is acute. This one is acute. And this one is a perfect corner. It's a right. So yes or no, does it have any obtuse? No, it doesn't. Okay, moving on here. Next, let's trace each angle. So this bottom one, acute. Other bottom one, acute. And here it is, folks, in green. We've got our very first obtuse triangle right here. This is an obtuse angle up top. So yes. All right, see if you can do the last one on your own without me. Okay, we'll see if you're right. There is 3 angles. 2 of them are acute, But this one that I'm tracing over in green is all 2. So yes, hopefully you got yes. All right, guys, way to go. Good job. If you'd like to take a break now, you are more than welcome to. But we are transitioning now into some U.S. history. Boy, are we at a good spot. So the last week, we talked about U.S. history. We had made it all the way up to pretty much 1900 with the Spanish-American War. Now, the Spanish-American War, as a reminder, was not fought on American soil. It was fought on the island of Cuba, which is about 100 miles off the coast of Florida. Now, the Spanish-American War um, was kind of a minor conflict. There wasn't, I mean, it was really important, but it wasn't nearly as important or as big or as world changing as this next event in American history. Now, this next event in American history has a couple different names, but the first name is the Great War. It was called the Great War because it was truly the greatest war in world history up until that point. Now, sadly, about 20, actually more like 30 years later, um, there was another one of these great wars that got named World War II, and because there was another one, this first one got changed its name usually to what we call World War One. So whenever you hear people talk about World War One or the Great War, they're talking about the exact same thing. So let's give some background information on World War One. All right, you've got the beginning of the 20th century. That's the 1900s. And if you remember, this is the Industrial Revolution. We've got airplanes, we've got cars now, we've got long distance telephone calls. Unfortunately, we also have conflict in Europe. Now, Europe is the continent across the Atlantic Ocean from us. Germany wanted to be a global superpower. They wanted to control more land, all right? This is how most wars usually start. Somebody wants more than what they have, and Germany wanted more. So Germany teamed up with a country called Austria-Hungary, which is now two separate countries, and Turkey, which I know that's a funny name, but Turkey is a huge country in the Middle East. It used to be called Persia. So you've got Germany, you've got Austria-Hungary, and you've got Turkey all teaming up to try to take over France and Russia. Now, for those of you that don't know your geography, Germany borders right up against both France and Russia, or at least it did back during this time. So Germany's trying to expand not just west toward France, but they're also expanding east toward Russia. So they're basically trying to grow themselves both ways at the same time. What they did, well, they invaded France and Russia, so they're fighting a war on both sides, both coasts, and Great Britain decided, hey, we can't let our French friends get conquered by the Germans, so the British joined the war to help defend the French. Well, soon more countries got involved too. Italy, Serbia, Portugal, Japan. Quickly, the war involved more than just two countries, like most wars. It involved the entire world. Hence why it's called World War. So most wars, if you think about it, are fought between two sides, right? Like the one we just talked about, the Spanish versus the American, which would have been the Cubans, basically. So it was really Spain versus the Cubans. Two sides, maybe a third. This is way more than that. This is like if you were out on the playground and it was like boys versus girls in a game of tag from my class, but then all of a sudden fifth grade came out and they had to pick sides, and then sixth grade came out, and then fourth grade comes out, and then it's everyone in the school picking sides. That's what this is like. All right. So quickly, the war involved more than just two countries, it involved the entire world. Remember that doctrine we talked about way back in 1823? Yeah, the Monroe Doctrine. President Monroe said we wouldn't mess with Europe if Europe doesn't mess with us. Well, guess what? Europe messed with us. Germany broke our rule, the Monroe Doctrine, by torpedoing U.S. ships trading with Britain. In April of 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany and entered World War I. So let's pause for a second. The year 1917, that's already almost 3 years into fighting. So World War I started about 3 years before America even got involved. All right, so we're kind of lucky that we lived a whole ocean away. We didn't really get involved until later in the war. Well, as soon as the Americans joined, it was pretty much a death sentence for the Germans because the Germans were not able to conquer Europe whenever they have to fight the full force of the American military alongside the British and the French. Both sides suffered immense casualties before the war finally ended in 1918. The war was said to be the war to end all wars. Well, is that true? Do we know? Was that the war to end all wars? Well, no, right? You know better. It's the year 2020 and there's been plenty of wars since then. Little did they know back then, at the time, that there was a young German politician that was plotting a new plan for Germany's to take over. That would send the world back into war 2 decades later. Any guesses on who that young German politician was? Well, if you know your history, you know that if you know your vocabulary, you know that 2 decades means 20 years. And if you know your history, that young German politician might be the most evil man to ever live. His name, Adolf Hitler. All right, World War I was fought with new technology, but they used old fighting methods. What does that mean? Well, you've got soldiers digging trenches. A trench is like imagine like a kind of like a hole in the ground, just big enough for you to stand up in, and it goes along for a long way, so you can kind of walk in it, kind of like a maze. All right, so they built the trenches in the ground so they could hide underneath the soil, so that whenever the other side was shooting at them, they had cover. All right, so the trenches, and you'll see in the videos, the trenches are down in the ground, and it, uh, just terrible, terrible, terrible things happen in the trenches. Um, the trenches did protect them from machine guns and bombs, but they did not protect the soldiers from disease and infection. If you can imagine being stuck in a tight little space with tons of other people, imagine what happens when one person gets sick, right? Then everyone gets sick. It was freezing cold in the winter, and a lot of these soldiers didn't have proper footwear. They didn't have dry socks or boots, so they would literally lose their feet from gangrene and all kinds of diseases and infections. So living in a trench would be pretty much like a hell on earth. It would not be someplace that you would ever want to spend more than a few minutes. All right, so you've got both sides digging trenches, all right? In between both sides, there's just like this giant, vast, empty spot of land. We call that no man's land. And it was called that because nobody could survive long enough to control it. Anyone who would get out of their trench and try to run at the other side would get shot down. All right. So what you have in World War One is just miles and miles of trenches, both sides just building trenches and trying hard to break across the line and take the enemy's trench. So overall, World War One produced nearly 17 million casualties without really accomplishing much of anything either. It is a very sad, sad war. A lot of people died. A lot of people suffered. I just hope, hope that wars like World War One and World War Two help our future, your future, and help you realize that that kind of loss is hopefully not necessary ever again. Hopefully, we can figure things out without mass killing. Um, but the most important thing about the Great War is that the US did the right thing. The Germans wanted to take over, and the US stepped in and defended democracy from the tyrannical Germans. So the USA was there, they had their friends' backs, and truly started to emerge as the greatest superpower. And you'll see after World War II, the United States truly becomes the world's largest superpower. But World War I, we were still um, kind of getting our reputation. So let's take a look at some videos, really cool videos of World War One. And I just want to say some of them are a little graphic. So if you get queasy, if you see blood or whatever, just look away or close your eyes or skip ahead in the video. But let's look at some details from this great war. I think it's really cool. Some of you actually have ancestors that fought in World War One. I know Peyton Fisher does. All right, so let's see.
Life in a trench, I'd like to explain in one word: horrific. It's mud, it's death, it's rats, it's stench, and soldiers develop an attitude in a trench that everybody is going to die.
Life in the trench was abysmal. There were several lines of trenches, and the front line trenches, of course, were the most dangerous because they were constantly under fire.
Into the
The Germans dug assiduously, building dry, safe, and comfortable trenches for themselves with bunkers that actually had electricity and sometimes running water. The British and French, who were convinced that they were never going to be there for that long, didn't spend nearly the same effort. And so their trenches tended to be muddy and wet and not that safe.
Disease ran rampant. It was very difficult to get any sort of sleep, a decent hot meal, keep your clothes dry, and more importantly, to keep your sanity.
There were so many health problems of just simple disease that took much more men out of combat than direct fire.
I think one word that would surprise people about life in a trench: boredom. A lot of time is spent just sitting, cleaning tools, and being scared to death the battle's going to start any minute.
It was just the day-to-day monotony of being trapped in this very small space and fighting for a war that's really fought in inches.
The idea of open warfare, of fighting out into what they called no man's land, wasn't working. The technology of the war had advanced so much with machine guns, artillery that could lob shells a mile. It became mostly a defensive war early on, and as a defensive war, you wanted to protect your troops, so the miles and miles of trenches were built.
There were often bodies buried in the sides of trenches, bodies lying out in the open in front of the trenches. The soldiers were experiencing not only the war that they were fighting at the moment, but the war that had been going on throughout those trenches for all of the years of the war.
A young lieutenant writes his mother and says, "I haven't been killed yet, but it's only a matter of time." That's typical of the way soldiers felt about life in the trench. You just did it. You existed day to day, tried to go on, keep your chin up, but one day the bullet was going to have your name on it, and you were going to perish. You weren't going home.
All right, so that was the first video. Just you can just tell, like World War One, that Those guys were just so stinking brave to live like that, day in and day out to protect your country. That's true heroism. All right, let's take a look at another video.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
In trying to help and aid that cause in ways that the German.
Oops. Here we go.
So America watches World War I from 1914 to April of 1917. And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into a foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
Remember, the United States is a nation of immigrants. People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The Americans had from the very beginning an official policy of neutrality, but neutrality never meant indifference or apathy.
Even though we're saying we don't want to involve ourselves, we certainly were sympathetic in trying to help and aid that cause in ways that the Germans saw as being destructive to their war aims. So in all those ways, the Wilson administration is walking a tightrope.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
Ultimately, the triggering event that brings us into the war is Germany's decision to revive unrestricted submarine warfare.
Added to that, the Germans had managed in a particularly ham-fisted way to try and recruit the Mexicans to come in on their side if America entered the war. And they had offered to return to the Mexicans all the lands they had lost in the 19th century to the U.S., Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The Germans sent this offer to the Mexicans by telegram, Western Union, of all things. Only what they didn't realize was the Western Union office was in London. And so the British captured the telegram and promptly sent it to the U.S. and released it in public. And that angered the American people so much that, combined with unrestricted submarine warfare, Wilson felt that he had to take the U.S. into the war against Germany and Austro-Hungary. When America entered the conflict, it changed the war. Although not as much as everybody expected, because just as America was entering the war, Russia was dropping out.
Now, it's a race. As Russia is leaving the war, can the United States get enough troops in to tilt that scale in favor of the Allies?
They brought in the men, the materiel, and the resources that these allies needed desperately.
The French and the British were suffering a sense that the war was stalemated, that defeat might be coming, and the American commitment was a real shot in the arm for both political leaders and for ordinary soldiers in the trenches.
Prior to the outbreak of World War I, America was recognized as a strong young nation. By joining with the Allies and really helping to bring about the end of the war, we positioned ourselves as one of the world powers for the rest of the century.
All right, so one of the things that I really want to highlight about that video is that the United States entering the war made a huge difference for the good guys. The British and the French were really close to just giving up, and basically what the U.S. was one of those 5-hour energy drinks. All right, it was what we were is that extra boost that they needed just to get over the hump and finally break through the German lines. So without the United States intervening, um, you could have had, instead of France and Britain and Italy and Spain and all these different European countries, you could just have one giant Germany run by a dictator, right? Um, so the United States was right to get involved. Um, the fact that they waited a little bit, that's a little more controversial, but it ended up saving a lot of lives, American lives. And, whenever we did enter, it came at a good time because it turned the war into the Allies' favor. So let's take a look here. I've got 2 more videos. I could show you videos and talk about World War I all day, but I'm not, I promise. Only 2 more. This one's really cool. It's all about the technology in the war and how machine guns and cannons and stuff came. This is just an ad. There we go.
I think one really clear way of understanding the shift in World War I in terms of technology is that soldiers rode in on horses and they left in airplanes.
At the beginning of World War I, warfare is almost in the 19th century style. The French sincerely believed that going at the troops with determination, at enemy troops, is the way to go. What they don't understand is the collision of technologies.
General Pershing didn't believe in the trench warfare. He grew up on the plains fighting in Indian warfare where it was an open confrontation. So he trained his troops to fight in the open warfare. The British and French generals thought he was crazy. They criticized him for this.
It's impossible to cross that deadly beaten zone, the deadly zone between the 2 lines. The most determined line of soldiers cannot oppose a machine gun that fires hundreds of rounds a minute.
I just want to pause the video really quick to show you. This is like what the Industrial Revolution truly looked like. Right? These factories being able to mass produce things like never before. And see how the Industrial Revolution, you have to study it first so you really understand what happened here in World War I. Without understanding the Industrial Revolution, you can't quite grasp how technology played such a big impact on World War I. I mean, look at the size of these missiles that are going to be launching from the cannons. This is all part of a result of the Industrial Revolution. All right, so if you remember, the Industrial Revolution happened kind of in between World War I and the Civil War, and it really makes an impact on how wars are fought.
World War I wasn't just the first industrial war, it was also the first scientific war. It was the first time that societies had taken all of their resources of science and intelligence and said, how do we do this better? How do we fight better? How do we develop technologies?
A lot of the armaments you see in World War I had been used before: submarines, trench warfare, Gatling guns, machine guns. What happens during World War I is that these become mature and these become even more destructive.
During the war, the governments of all the different warring powers put enormous amounts of time and effort into scientific and technical development, so that the advancements which would have happened anyway happen at a much more rapid pace, and they happen according to the priorities of the warring powers.
Something happened in trench warfare that changed the course of the war and changed the way we understand warfare today, and that is chemical warfare.
The first gas attack, it was at a place called Vimy Ridge, and it was mostly Canadian soldiers who were being attacked. And the Canadian soldiers who were in the trenches saw this cloud of haze coming towards them. They had no gas masks. They had no equipment to protect them. Chlorine gas causes your lungs to fill with liquid, and so essentially you drown from the inside out. It was really the first war in which all of the technologies and science and industry of the 19th century were put to the sole purpose of killing people.
All right, so um, back to our story here. So whenever I said that it's a war that was fought using new technology but old methods, now you kind of understand what I meant by that. Troops were still trying to run at each other and fight like hand-to-hand combat and shoot each other up close like they used to, but the technology is so much more advanced for a different style of fighting. We've got technology now in World War One, like machine guns, that if you were to run up to a machine gun, someone with a machine gun, there's no chance of winning that fight, right? You're just going to get mowed down, and so is everyone else. Same thing with airplanes, all right? No longer can you just build giant bases or forts without some kind of aerial protection, because now you've got airplanes that are able to drop bombs. You also have, uh, as they showed, you also have tanks and heavy artillery weapons. Um, so you can't just go up to your enemy and kill them anymore. They've got protection. They've got machines that can help carry them and transport them long distances. It changes everything about how we fight. And the most important, I think, um, that they showed in that last video was the chemical warfare. You have the chlorine gas, the mustard gas. That is a type of chemical that will literally kill the enemy without ever having to face them yourself, right? The effects of chemical warfare are just so devastating that after World War One, the world as a whole decided to get together and make a pact never to use chemical warfare ever again, just because it can kill so many people so quickly. Now, there have been countries that have broken that rule. Um, I'm thinking of not too long ago, Syria. I know they had broken that rule using a type of chlorine gas. But in general, the effects of the Great War and the chemical warfare were so bad that the world just kind of said, hey, we're not going to ever attack each other like that. It's just too deadly and too powerful. All right, so I've got one more video for you. It's all about um, the #1 takeaways from World War One, and some great historians have some answers for you. Here we go.
One thing that you should know about World War I, it brought us into the modern era.
And today, we live in the world that World War I shaped.
For Americans in particular, it brought Americans firmly into the 20th century and into a global mindset.
You can see that in technology, the development of planes. You can see that in social movements, women's equal rights, the civil rights movement.
Suddenly, one worker in an industrialized nation could produce what hundreds of workers were needed to produce in the 18th century and the early 19th century. This gave an advantage to nations in building ships, in exploiting technology, in changing the way that things were done, both intellectually and physically.
It's the 20th century. It's a whole new ballgame from the 19th century.
The one thing that people should know about World War I, probably the toll that it takes in terms of what happens with death counts after the war that are really complicated by the influenza, the spread of germs. And a lot of times we don't think about the impact of the war after the war.
It's uncertain of where the first case of the flu took place, although recent studies seem to indicate that an Army training camp in Kansas is where And then all of a sudden, it spread like wildfire across the United States and impacted major cities. Everyone knew someone who was impacted by the flu. Problem was, there weren't enough doctors to handle this.
So, how do you care for those that have
Okay, so I
died?
want to pause it really quick because we hear a lot about what they just shared right now in the news with the coronavirus. So something similar to the coronavirus happened way back right after World War One, which is what they're talking about, called the Spanish flu. And just like coronavirus, the Spanish flu was really transmittable, and a lot of people got it, and a lot of people, millions of people, died from the Spanish flu. Um, the coronavirus is different than the Spanish flu, obviously, but it could have that kind of effect on the United States and on the world, just like it did back in 1918 and 1919. But the difference is nowadays we have extremely good healthcare. We have a lot more technology to combat something like a pandemic, like the Spanish flu or coronavirus. So back then, they didn't quite understand completely how the germs are spread, how to cut down on infections, and there was no self-quarantining. Um, but something similar happened nearly a little over 100 years ago during World War One. And if you hear about people talking about the Spanish flu, that's what it was. Okay, back to
Also those that are incapacitated, and what is the trajectory of disease in the aftermath of war. And those are things that typically we don't associate with World War I, but are really actually very important.
The one thing that people should know about World War I was how unbelievably violent it was. World War I was by far the bloodiest war that Europe had experienced in centuries.
The Battle of the Somme, probably the most famous battle that the British troops were involved in, July 1st, 1916. It's 19,000 soldiers were killed in a single day. It's astronomical to think about that figure. These were young men who, of course, didn't come home. They didn't get married. They didn't have children. And a whole generation of British life was lost on a single battle.
What made the First World War a modern war was the way that it mobilized whole societies, and not just mobilized them as laborers and farmers, but also made whole societies targets. This is the first time that you see sort of mass targeting of civilian populations as well as soldiers. And I think that's what makes the First World War distinctive and distinctively modern.
All right. So the Great War, also known as World War One, changed American history, and it also changed and shaped the world that we live in today. All right, so that's all I have for you today. Thanks for sticking around for my history lesson. You know how much I love U.S. history. So anyway, I miss you guys. I love you guys, and finish that Google form and go outside and play, unless it's raining. Hopefully it's not.